Hello, and welcome to episode 273 of Something About the Beatles podcast, the first of 2024. So, Happy New Year to you all. This is actually one of those things, kind of like Abbey Road and Let It Be, where you're hearing it sort of out of sequence from when it was actually taped, which was in October 2023. But then Now and Then happened, and as you all know, it ended up being kind of a major undertaking to get a podcast discussion going with the 21 guests and the time spent editing and putting it all together and making it coherent. So this episode took a little longer to arrive to you, but it was actually taped first. So when you heard Sibbie O'Sullivan, my guest today in that show, that part was taped after we'd already had this conversation that you're about to hear here. So factor that in when you listen to things, and know that as we talked, Now and Then had not really entered our consciousness as far as a pocket of joy, as she described it, that the Beatles so freely have given the world from day one. So my guest is Sibbie O'Sullivan. She's a retired academic. She does reviews for the Washington Post from time to time. And the book that she wrote, My Private Lennon, Explorations from a Fan Who Never Screamed, is one of the most singular works I've ever read. It is not a very long book. Growing up with the Beatles, as it were, to coin a Ron Schomburg phrase. Introduction, Ask Me Why. Boys. In My Life, John and the Beatles. Mother. Things I Heard Today. Of Balls and the Beatles. There's a Place. Aeolian Cadences. Truth or Beauty. Blokes. It's Only Love. August 14th, 1965, A Day in My Life. Beautiful Boy/Girl. And in the End. John Lennon is shot to death December 8th, 1980. So those are the chapters. And I became aware of this book when it was first published simply by the title and not knowing anything more about it. And yeah, I guess to my detriment, you can misjudge a book by its title. And when it came along, I get a lot of stuff thrown my way as the person that does this podcast. And not everything that doesn't make it to the show is for lack of my perception of its quality, but more about if I've got the time or bandwidth to take it all in at the time. And so there are books that slip through the cracks, as this one did, and I was under the impression, knowing nothing more about it than what the cover looked like, that it was a first-generation fan recounting their Lennon fixation. So I thought, okay, that's cool, that's nice. Maybe not a priority right now, but sooner or later I'll probably get around to it if it doesn't get bumped by something else. But anyway, that was my story with the connection with this book. And then in the past year, there is the Journal of Beatles Studies that came into being. Holly Tessler spearheading that, and several of my friends are involved in it. It was Allison Bumstead who actually did the review of Sibbie's book. I was actually blown away by it. I thought it was a terrific book, a very singular book, and it's bigger than the premise of a first-gen fan recounting their Beatle fandom. It's much bigger than that. So I will post a link to Allison's review, and you could check it out. I would suggest anybody interested check out the Journal of Beatles Studies. Pretty solid content there that you may be interested in, as is this book. So it just seemed natural to invite Allison onto the show as a recurring guest and somebody who's well-versed in this book, knowing that this conversation would take a different direction than if it was just me. So you can judge for yourself. It was a fun talk, and Sibbie's a terrific guest, a terrific, very thoughtful and insightful guest, which is exactly the kind I like to have. And you may agree or not with some of her takes.
I like them. I'm a school teacher, so I came and brought my students. And the kids, I like them. I'm past the stage, and I think they're good. I still think they're good. They're good showmen. They're honest. I think their music is fine also. And they're good kids. I think everyone here is quite good. A few exceptions, but they get carried away. Can't blame them. We did the same. I was with Elvis Presley when he first came up.
I really enjoyed the book. A lot more than I expected, as Robert alluded to with his own thoughts with the title. And I'm becoming a better fan and academic with age, and my Beatle favoritism is waning. And I've always struggled with John, as many of us have. We love him, but he's a conflicting and complicated figure. And of course, he's out of context for myself as an 80s baby. And when I was asked to review your book for the Journal of Beatles Studies, I was worried I may not connect with your love of John, but I was totally wrong. Absolutely wrong. As your story is something that we can all connect with. And reading your book, Sibbie, I fell in love with how each of your chapters or essays, reveal pieces of your very complex relationship with the Beatles, especially John Lennon, and how he found you in many moments throughout your life. And every step of the way, while reading the book, I was thinking of my connection with my fandom and the Beatles, and any text that can get someone to think about their own self is a magnificent piece.
Well, that's wonderful to hear.
You articulated in the book a thought that had been sort of steeping around in my head for a long time as you try to analyze why the Beatles. And there's a million answers and none of them are right because none of them do justice to it fully. But I do think one with some validity is it's like they were four archetypes that everybody could relate to, find one Beatle or another that, oh yeah, that's totally my life. And at whatever point in your life, you dip in, you dip out, as you describe in your book, there's something appropriate and fitting and resonating about their story that applies to your life. And it gives you some validity. It gives you some sense of hopefulness if things are bad, that, okay, they went through this too. This combination of four distinct personas that created this amazing music that reaches us on another level, and every other thing they stood for that projected, that resonated with audiences. It's like they're the whole package, and there's got to be a term for that, some phenomenon, which is what they are. They're bigger than just a group that made music, that maintains this power to this day, to people that were not alive during the 1960s.
That's interesting because I've been thinking about this Zoom and looking through, not only hearing the podcast that Allison had the interviews, but also a book that really influenced me and kind of pushed me to write my own, which is Candy Leonard's Beatleness. And I think that that's the central book. And I was just looking through it before I got on here. And she's got, she's a sociologist by training. And she's got a word here that I'd never heard about. It's called cohort events. She says it's social historians call a cohort event, which is where large groups of people sort of attach themselves and have exactly what you just expressed, that there's this connection that they may not be able to understand completely, logically, if you will. Well, why? Why has this happened to this particular large number of people at a particular time? What she points out here in reference to the Beatles, and this is at the end of her book, which is all about exactly this cohort event of happiness, that at least this application of this term has in the past been aligned with horrible, I'm quoting, horrible traumatic experiences such as natural disasters and stuff like that. And here we've got a fabulously uplifting and lifelong connection with that uplift with the Beatles. And I'm trying to think, is there another cohort event that has happened recently that carries that same kind of power and thoroughness? So we're part of this, we're part of it, and it's happy. It's exactly what you said, Robert. There's, at least I can trace my life in the two other women, Carol and Deb also, and maybe you too, Robert, with your own experience with the Beatles. They come in. They can come in, or we go to them through their music at times when we need their music, or waiting in anticipation, as millions did for Peter Jackson's Get Back, which really, really revved up a lot of people. And it was like, here they are again. I remember just voices, and there they are ad hoc, they're not performing, there they are again. That sense of there they are again is really sustaining, and it's happy because the rest of the world is not very happy right now.
Right. and they deliver every time. They're the dependable wellspring of that feeling. It's one thing for people that were fans back in the day, or people that came along later with their fandom, or even later still, like Allison's case. And I can't think of a single person I talked to, and I had a number of in-depth shows about Get Back, that was not moved to tears at some point watching that.
Absolutely.
I'm 36, and I think what's so spectacular about the Beatles is you may be part of the cohort. I'm not part of that cohort. I've been brought in. They're still drawing people in and sucking them in. And I think of the Gen Z fan who is very active, especially with John Lennon on social media and at the Beatles events. Skylar Moody, who is very, very active, and she's in her early 20s. I mean, that's her life, and I love it. I think it's fascinating.
I wonder if there's something about what you described, Sibbie, about these unifying moments that impact us, and traditionally they have been unpleasant, the war or something like that shape our lives, and here's this joyous one, that part of what sustains the momentum of the Beatles among younger people is the fact that they are looking for something to come along, their own Beatles in our time, that has failed to show up. Yet the Beatles are still front and center in our culture. Every other year there's something, some event. The 90s was Anthology, and Ringo's touring, Paul's touring. We have now Get Back. Ringo and Paul are still touring. There's still more product coming out, deluxe editions of their box sets, and there's always some sort of Beatle thing out there that is introducing them and getting another wave of hype going. And I don't mean hype in a negative sense, but like a wave of promotion that if you've been asleep to this point or it just wasn't on your radar, it may be sucking you in. They're always there, and I think that lacking something contemporary that has that same unifying power makes the Beatles so attractive, because they damn well did it in their day. At least 2 occasions, the Ed Sullivan Show, they unite 73 million people, an entire nation, and then 3 short years later, the release of Sgt. Pepper worldwide, this unifying social youth culture thing around the world. Everybody knows where they were when they heard that album for the first time. Again, it's a positive thing, not like hearing JFK had been shot or John Lennon had been shot. It's like, where were you when you had heard Pepper for the first time? I can't think of anything since the Beatles ended that's had that kind of unifying power.
Yeah.
Or at least not a positive thing.
Well, actually, help me with this, Allison, because you're probably closer to the current vibe out there now, because frankly, I can't connect with music today. I just don't. And I know I'm missing out something. I'm thinking, though, that you would, Robert, possibly get an argument that both Beyonce and Taylor Swift are huge, huge cohort events and give a great deal of pleasure and power to people. I'm thinking, and again, I'm struck by the 2 gals that Allison talked with in the podcast that I listened to.
Carol and Deb.
Yeah, Carol and Deb. I think that there is something fundamentally different, or perhaps it's just me, okay, between the way you experienced the Beatles back beginning in late 63 and then 64, and the way that now you do experience and grab onto and feel great importance with somebody like Taylor Swift and Beyonce, because so much technology, compression of time, availability of multiple media has happened between my experience with the Beatles and how these other super performers have millions of worldwide fans. And go back to Michael Jackson, one of those performers. So maybe I'm wrong about this, but I sort of feel that the way that the fans connect now to those specific acts, I can't feel the connection. I hate the largeness of it. One thing I respect about the Beatles, and yes, they performed. I mean, they started performing in Liverpool and Hamburg. It was years before they finally in 66 said that's it. But they performed in small groups, that there was an immediate sort of unmediated connection, a closeness, literally a closeness. No fireworks went off. No girls were dancing in the back. You could hear them through very rudimentary mics and stuff. They exhibited their personality in whatever the moment required, however many drinks they had before they performed. However, if they performed in leather, they performed in suits. And this happened, I think, pretty much up until the huge Shea Stadium and things like that. But because the fans had by that time created, I think, a personal closeness with them that was still there. But I can't understand why someone wants to go and sit with 50,000 people and hear either Paul McCartney, Swift, or Beyonce. So I'm not the one to really explain what is happening now. I love Adele. I love Adele because she doesn't perform in a bathing suit, and she said she never will. And what I want Adele to do is to get a new band and make it smaller. It's time for her to do what Bob Dylan did, at what Queen Latifah did, what Joni Mitchell did. She needs to do, in my mind, the American Songbook. Do an album of American Songbook songs because her voice is terrific. It'll save her voice. Get a small combo there. Does any of that make sense? Because I'm 75 years old and I'm just not interested in fireworks and stuff like that. And the Beatles never had that. And I'm wondering whether because they never had that, because they are closer, they're just simply closer through any media channel, they seem to be closer. That allows, however old you are, to make a stronger personal relationship. But I could be wrong. And Allison, I'm wondering because you've studied so much how teenage girls, especially, make these connections. What do you think is happening today to explain either the popularity of someone? I can understand the popularity of Beyonce and Taylor Swift because they're fabulously talented and important performers. But then there's also the younger folks going to the Beatles. So I don't know quite what I can say about that unless the younger folks are discovering something that's more personal and something that compared to the fireworks and the dancing and all the other things you need to feel a part of that, you can just take in their music. You can take in their life stories, which are fabulous stories. You can take in all the history of it. Does that make sense at all?
Yeah, Sibbie, it does. I think the one thing that we'll say Swifties or Beyonce fans have in common with Beatles fans is that sense of community.
Yeah.
Especially for Swifties, is that when they go to the concerts, it's they share their friendship bracelets, which I love that they do that. And they have this common experience, and it's a sense of community that is lacking. One of the things I write about with the Teen Fan magazines is that in your generation, you could buy a magazine and you could share it and pass it around and read it together and talk about it. Well, that doesn't exist anymore. You can't buy those type of magazines anymore, at least for the younger women. And there's that lack of community. Everything is just right here on your phone. And it may feel like a sense of community at times. And I think there is a sense of community online. But I think it's this idea that you can actually get together and share that love, whether it's 50,000 fans or not, with a good sound system. So you can hear the artist.
Yeah.
But you're right. I mean, going to a stadium with a large crowd, it can be very frustrating. But I think it can be very just as religious as a smaller experience for some of those fans. I personally don't like to go to giant concerts anymore. I did go see Paul when he played ACL in Austin, but the festival scene is a little different than the stadium scene anyways. But yeah, I feel it's a sense of community that still exists. And Beyonce, she's been in my life since, when did Destiny's Child? I don't know, since like 13 or 14. So she's a fixture there. I'm not a big fan. I don't dislike her and won't not listen to her music, but I don't follow her and I don't follow Taylor Swift either because when she released her music, she came out, she definitely had a younger fan base that now is older. Taylor Swift, I think, is 2 years younger than me. So her and I are close in age, but I don't necessarily have that connection with them specifically. I fell into a weird hole of the 60s as a young person, especially I don't know why, but when I was 14, I just thought Jim Morrison was so cool and I wanted to go more in that direction. And I remember, Robert, you mentioned Sergeant Pepper. I remember when I first heard the record from beginning to end on my turntable, not just a CD. CDs were so expensive. So, but yeah, I think it's that sense. I know it's that sense of community. And for others, it may be something else, but it's definitely with the friendship bracelets. It seems exciting to share that love because when you go back in the world and you're like, oh, I want to talk about Taylor Swift, like, ew, I don't want to talk about Taylor. That's not who I'm interested in. But when you're there, everyone's there for that same purpose of you, and they might show it differently, but they all love Taylor or Beyonce or.
So, do these fans scream? Is anybody screaming the way that the Beatles fans were screaming in the live performances?
I think for the J-pop and K-pop bands, perhaps.
Yes.
But that's a different thing. It seems to be deliberately more targeted to the younger fans. What I would say about Beyonce and Taylor Swift, irrespective of the fact they both clearly have talent, the way I look at it from my perspective, and I'm not a member of fandom of either act. Neither one did anything for me. I can respect them, but I can't get into their music. It doesn't stick whatsoever. But just as an outsider's perspective, as a difference between them and the Beatles, and maybe it's the times, but certainly it's common to both acts, is that they come off to me as super slick, contrived, and produced and controlled. Whereas with the Beatles, and maybe it was the times, but certainly a large measure of their individual humanity came through.
Yes.
I can't see a Beyonce or Taylor Swift even allowing a film crew to film them all day at work, slogging through rehearsals, trying to get a project together. It'd be cool if they did, but I can't see that happening. You talk about in your book, one of the things that attracted you to John was you were able to extrapolate from his vocal performances some sense of his inner life and loneliness and pain and all that. I don't hear that in popular singers now. That element you can connect to, that you can hear some humanity in there. It's like, oh my God, I feel his pain. There's people that can contrive that, but it felt absolutely genuine. And then when you'd see the Beatles around their news conferences or whatever other footage was around of them not necessarily performing, they seemed a lot more real to you and relatable.
Well, I think that you're onto something that is happening across the board in our culture and has been happening, well, certainly since the 70s or so. And I would say that MTV was late 70s, certainly by the early 80s.
81, yeah.
This is a huge, huge question, but the Beatles, I think, should be a part of it for exactly what you said, is that we are moving to a mechanized version of every level of life. And we have lost, I think, at least on a large scale level, what gets kind of broadcast across the usual and larger venues of media here. I mean, and Beyonce and Taylor Swift are sort of known names. And I think they are slick, and I think they are overproduced. I think Adele is overproduced. I think that we have moved from personality to performance. The performance is the dancing, the fireworks, the sexual motions. But I'm not against sexual motions, but there's just sort of, everybody's in bathing suits. I mean, it'd be one thing if, John Lennon came on stage with a toilet seat in Hamburg one day, but this was totally spontaneous. And it wasn't like Devo. Was it Devo that was all dressed up?
The flower pots on their heads.
Plastic suits or something like that. The talking heads could look funny. That's okay. But it's gone beyond this now.
It's beyond the beyond.
It's gone beyond, just imagine all the preparation going into any of these super performances. And you're right, the Beatles were spontaneous, they were generous, they practiced like crazy. Mm-hmm. They knew what they were doing, they harmonized beautifully. John Lennon's voice is a prize to the universe. They were great singers, they were united. Every quality of what you would want from a musical experience, I think, is there in just four men, okay? And then you latch on, at least I latched on, obviously, to John. And There was something about his voice. My book was originally called Captured by a Voice.
Oh.
And I was totally captured by his voice, particularly. And he sang most of the songs in the early albums. Then that started to change with Hard Day's Night. Captured by a Voice, that is so mysterious. You don't have to see a voice to fall in love with it. And that's what bothers me, I think, about all these performers now are so wonderfully looking and they're in great shape and they prance around in their lingerie. And it's like, are you looking or are you listening? Now, interestingly enough, the looks of the Beatles was part of that, like, uh-oh moment in our culture. Like, wow, they got these haircuts. Are they really men? They're so different. What do we do with that? And that's not unusual when somebody hits the scene, because it happened with Elvis too, and deciding the clothes to wear. But that, I think, is so much different from this mass production and sort of slickness that's happening now. And the Beatles did not have that. The Beatles were not slick. I think when they tried to be slick, at least to me, some sort of like, I don't like the video of Penny Lane. They're all on a horse and dressed up in, Edwardian clothes or something like that.
And now, I beat you to it. The Beatles. They made a special film for the Hollywood Palace about a Liverpool street called Penny Lane. I think it's the most imaginative treatment of a song I've ever seen. And here they are, on location, the Beatles. The Beatles in Penny Lane. If you think that was far out, wait till you see their next one, Strawberry Fields. It's a musical romp through an open field with psychedelic overtones and a feeling of expanding consciousness. If you know what that means, let me know.
I know the video was coming in at that time. Early on, you could say that the Beatles made some of the first rock videos.
Do you remember having that reaction in real time? Did you see it in 67? Because it got shown on American Bandstand and Hollywood Palace.
No, I'd have to say no. By 67, I was not looking at American Bandstand. I'd been a big fan of American Bandstand in late 50s and the 60s. But no, by 67, there was so much good music other than the Beatles by 67 that I had lost that sort of gotta know everything about the Beatles. Mm-hmm. So no, I did not see that.
It was years and years before I saw that. But I'd seen, by that time, pictures from those promos in Beatle books. So I was like, oh, that looks cool, but I hadn't seen the actual motion to it. And I already had my own mental perception of the song Penny Lane and Strawberry Fields just from years of listening to it at that point. Mm. So it was almost like a novel thing. It's like, oh, why are they showing so much of John in Paul's song from Penny Lane? That was my reaction to it.
I actually have a question. You mentioned your original title, Captured by Voice, which I like. And I think of like Roland Barthes' grain of the voice and what we're attracted to in the sounds. I wanted to ask you, since you're here, in the opening of your chapter, you title it, Ask Me Why. Could you explain to us, for you, and I know you talk about it in your book, but for the listeners, is why in the beginning, why the Beatles?
I can't remember precisely if Billy Crawford, Billy was a girl in high school, and she had an older brother stationed in England, and he sent Beatle magazines over to her, and she brought them to school. And I can't remember whether that was before I heard the Beatles for the first time in December of 1963 or afterwards. But I remember it was the lunchtime or a homeroom time of looking at these guys. And they were just so beautiful and so different. And one thing that set me apart from Carol and Deb, they were 13. They were in junior high when the Beatles came. I was in high school and 15. There's a big, or there used to be a big difference between junior high and high school experience and grouping and sense of self and stuff. And I think there's also a big difference between being 13 and 15 back in the 60s. It might be closer together now because girls are developing faster and stuff. But there was definitely a matter of, oh, these are handsome, sexy guys. Even if in my case, I hadn't had any sexual experience or anything like that, but I had gone through my teenage crushes enough to know how important how somebody looked. And I think what it was also is that there was just a thrumming around, a vibration that something is coming, something is coming. And my local DJ really played it up. And I Want to Hold Your Hand and I Saw You Standing There was debuted on December, I think it's 23rd, 1963.
So Marcia Albert of Dublin Drive of Silver Spring has the honor of introducing something brand new and exclusive here at WWDC. Marcia, the microphone here on the Carol James Show is yours.
Ladies and gentlemen, for the first time on the air in the United States, here are the Beatles singing I Want to Hold Your Hand.
And Betty had a transistor radio. And when I heard I Saw Her Standing There, first of all, it's a great rock and roll song. And I still am a great lover of rock and roll songs. So I think it was just that total combination of voice, looks, great music, anticipation, and they weren't the Four Seasons and they weren't the Beach Boys. I felt nothing for either the Four Seasons or the Beach Boys. I liked the black singers a lot better, but the black singers I liked simply for their music. I didn't have a sexual sort of vibe going on with them, but I did not like the Beach Boys or the Four Seasons, who were very, very popular music. The music to my ears at that time just wasn't gripping enough. But when I heard I Saw Her Standing There, I said, that's it. So I think that that's kind of the common way that maybe at least teenage girls like the Beatles. And then the anticipation. It really got promoted from December to their February Ed Sullivan show. The promotion worked. And I think such an anticipation was building up that this was going to be an event. And it was.
So they were the whole package in a way that nothing else had reached you that way before.
Oh, well, I had sent away against my mother's wishes for a 5x7 black and white photo of Ed Burns back in the 50s and the 60s, who played Kooky in the show 77 Sunset Strip. And he had a song, a novelty song, so Kooky, because he had one of those pompadour things, spit curl and the whole business. And I thought that was the American sort of tough, with this pompadour. Coming out of Elvis and Conway Twitty and stuff like that. Though Conway was a little too much for me. And I wanted this picture. And I had some, movie magazines and other things like that. And I really liked Bobby Rydell. How he looked. But then I grew up. I mean, those were 11, 12, 13 crushes, But by the time I got into high school, which would put me in 15 years, I don't know. I saw men, boys differently. And the Beatles were the most different from any American guy that I was attached to or attracted to. So Kooky was short-lived. Let me put it that way. And I had also liked Marlon Brando. I really got a kick out of Marlon Brando in the movie Streetcar Named Desire. I felt that was a very handsome, hunky kind of guy. But I didn't swoon over him. He was a movie actor. There was something...
It's a very different archetype from the Beatles.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was a tough guy and beautiful body and stuff. For me, for the Beatles, it was a total thing. It wasn't just their good looks, their voice. Something was brimming in my intelligence. By that time, I had decided I was going to be a writer. Youthful things and played around with it, daydreaming and things like that. But I was also curious in art. There was something of an intelligence that the Beatles exuded. And it was partly, maybe completely, until I learned otherwise, that they actually did have intelligence. It was a British accent, because I think many, many Americans saw Britain as just a more intelligent country in a way, more poised, more proper, more standing up straight, and that worked for them and against them because they were stuffed shirts, get relaxed a little bit, but they also had that sort of crispness to their talk, and which was sort of intelligent. And then the James Bond movies, so I was sort of primed, I think, to realize that the British guys, beginning with the Beatles, definitely had something that the American guys didn't have.
One of the things that I love is you mentioned in the very beginning of your book, and to our surprise and joy, you share at the end of the book, is your picture that you took of John Lennon at the Ed Sullivan Show. So I was curious, how did you obtain a ticket to the Ed Sullivan Show, and can you describe your time?
Oh, well, my best friend, Betty, who I write about in the book, she became my best friend in junior high and all the way up till a little bit after high school, I guess. Her father worked for the FCC, and I guess he was pretty high up in the FCC. And one summer in 65, got a phone call, and Betty said, we're going to go see the Beatles, because her father had gotten tickets for us to see the first rehearsal on August the 15th, I think it was, 1965, at Ed Sullivan. And that was just fabulous, absolutely fabulous. As you know in the book, I wish I could remember so many details about it, that whole event. I don't. But we got the ticket, and for a long time I kept the ticket, and I obviously will never part with the photo. But some years back, I needed money, and I contacted my friend Kevin, who contacted memorabilia people. He was sort of a rock and roll collector himself, and I sold that ticket. I don't regret selling the ticket because I really needed the money and I got a good price for it, but I'll never part with the photo. I wanted to take one picture, took my camera, got the picture. We were pretty close to them. It's a very raked studio. And I think that, and I was thinking about this because if I had the ticket stub, I could tell you exactly what row I was. I think I was in maybe the 12th row up, okay? And it curves, and it was we weren't exactly in the center, but we were not at the wing, okay? So if you're looking at the show, I was closer to where Paul stood than to where John stood. And that's why my photo has John sort of far away. We walked in. I knew it. I was wearing a green dress. And it was a small studio, 712 people. And we walk in, Betty and I, we take our chairs, and I look at the stage, and the stage is not set up yet. And as I write, there's a man at a piano, and standing over him is another man with headphones on, and the man at the piano has a white shirt on, and the sleeves are rolled up. And it took me, I don't know how many seconds to realize that the man at the piano, I swear to God, was John Lennon. And he was not communing with the audience at all that I recollect. Nobody was screaming, as I recollect, because the people were coming in, and he's talking to the guy with the headphone. And I just remember, that's John Lennon, but I saw him sideways without a jacket, but he'd been over, but it was John. And then he got up and he got up and walked away. He might have waved. I don't know. And then I don't know what happened after that, if the curtains closed. The whole show was rehearsed. And then when they came on, the curtain opened, and Ed Sullivan does his things. Now, here comes the Beatles, and screaming begins. But the screaming this time, I don't think was at all like it was in the February performances, because you could hear them sing. And they looked beautiful. They were just there. They were happy. It was Paul, George, and John, and Ringo. And they just played. And I don't know when I took the photo of John. He's up against white, like a white drywall or something. I don't think he's playing or singing. He's not in front of a guitar, but I know that it couldn't be when Paul was singing yesterday, because the studio and the stage had gone black except for the spotlight on Paul and a little bit of like kind of a blue light behind him way back at the stage where the string quartet was. And so it wasn't during that. So I don't know what John was doing or when he was doing it. And I just remember they seemed like they had been playing for a long time. They knew their stuff and they were happy. And John kind of bounced around a little bit the way that John does. And then he had that smart comment after Paul sang yesterday.
Thank you, Paul. I was just like him.
And then they closed the program with help. And I was amazed when I closed my eyes and I try to see it. John really does stand quite differently at the mic. He stands in that sort of kind of almost like a very tiny squat down, powerful playing. George sometimes dances around. Paul, I'm not a Paul fan. I give him credit for everything, and he's a great guy, but boy, does he play to the audience. The others really don't play to the audience. They really don't. But Paul, when he was doing yesterday, I mean, you could see, him bat his lashes and everything like that. And it's a beautiful song. We heard it before the rest of America, which at the time I didn't know. But I think it feels really cool that those 700 people heard this song before anybody else in America, for the most part, except probably some DJs. And that is about all I remember, except I know that I was there. And Betty and I did not scream. And there were screamers, but I think as the songs went on, it kind of quieted down. And also, a lot of the girls that were in the audience, they were with their parents or someone older. This was a time, and again, Debbie and Carol mentioned this was a time when you would wear gloves sometimes out, when you dressed up to go to a concert. So there was sort of that formality, that everyone being behaved. And we were told to behave. I think there might have been an announcement, or maybe the usher just sort of said, just sit in your seats. Nobody was, as far as I know, lunging or weeping as they did at the first Ed Sullivan. But I could be mistaken because I didn't see everybody. But you could clearly hear them. And that was really good that you could hear them.
Would you jump over if you had a chance?
Yes, I stopped her.
What?
If she wasn't holding me back, I would have. Yeah, if you would have went over, I would have cracked your skull.
What would you do?
We would do anything that would hurt them.
What would
I'd
you
just
do?
grab them.
What were you thinking of doing if you made it out there and were able to?
Kissing them. Kissing them. And get a hold of their hair and pull it out. Pull it out. Why would you want to do that for? You're going to hurt them. Good. Tough. I like them.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Sibbie. I do have a question. Were you surprised or shocked or excited when you were told that you were going to go to the Ed Sullivan Show?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I really was. We both, Benny and I mean, all the way up. Her father drove us up. We had Beatles magazines in the back seat of the car. And we just looked at him and we laughed and giggled. By that time, I was 15. Betty had turned 16. We were talking in double entendres and making fun of things. But no, all we had across our laps were Beatle magazines. Now, neither of us had been to New York City. And so I've got more pictures of girls with mile-high beehives walking down Midtown than I have of that one of John Lennon, obviously, because we were sort of wowed by New York City itself, the people, the ambiance and everything like that. But yeah, we were really excited. And then we got together on the 12th of September, and I took photographs off the television because that's when it was shown on Ed Sullivan. So I've got close-ups of all of them, but it's the camera photographing off the TV, which back in those days was really sort of like a transmission to Mars or something. Yes, we were quite excited, and I was surprised my mother let me go, and we were a poor family. She gave me $10, which didn't last much in New York at all, but she was excited about me. I know my mother was excited about that I could go. And September comes, school comes. We got a little bit of status.
Oh.
But I knew 5 girls that went to see them at the Washington Coliseum the day after they were on Ed Sullivan the first time. So it wasn't unusual for girls at Wheaton High School to have seen the Beatles live. But Betty and I did. And yes, it was quite exciting.
Apart from this falling into your lap, was there any particular interest in going to see them live? Because you're in New York the day before the Shea Stadium show, which was a whole other thing. And I get where you mentioned earlier that you didn't like big stadium shows, at least you don't now. But was there any interest in going to that DC show or any other time when they came near you?
Oh, we couldn't get tickets to the Coliseum show, the first show in February. No, we couldn't get tickets.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
No, the tickets went like that.
Gotcha.
They were in town. They had that famous, wonderful interview with Carol James, who was the disc jockey on WWDC AM radio. There was so much good radio back in the 60s and the 70s. Oh, it was just prime. If you have not listened to that interview, it's online. Betty and I, of course, we taped it and then we transcribed it, which took about a week. And we were nervous because we didn't want to flip the wrong thing and lose them. That interview tells you so much about the Beatles. Everything is in it. Their intelligence, their kindness, their risqueness, their camaraderie, their joyfulness, their you can't put anything over me. It is a fabulous, fabulous interview. So if you haven't heard it, I urge you to get it.
WWDC flew your record. I want to hold you. Yes.
Thanks, that was great. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Well, you're very welcome. I'd like you to meet the young lady right after we're finished talking here. Marcia Albert is. Come on in here very quickly, Marcia, and then we have to.
Marcia, good old Marcia.
Come here. Because I know Marcia Albert. This is George Harrison.
Hello,
Paul.
Marcia.
There is
Marcia Bog. Hello,
Marcia. Now, you know everybody. They call you the Chief Beatle. Is that you're all on an equal
Look, I don't
footing.
call you names. They don't you call me names.
Well, who's responsible for the haircut?
Well, I think it's bigger than both of us, Carol. That's all I can say.
One of us had, well, I don't know what happened to the tape that we made, but it's online, so I know that I can get it until I die. And I often listen to it again because what it did was all of those voices coming at you. Paul, you knew right away. Ringo, obviously, he had the deepest voice. But it was hard sometimes to distinguish, at least to our ears, was it George or was it John? And they talked over one another. It's such... Nobody got primed for this. They didn't have a press agent. Well, they travel with a press agent, but they didn't have somebody whispering, saying, now, when you get this question, say this. Totally unfiltered. And that's where George makes his double entendre. I swear to God, when Carol James says, and what would you like to be if you weren't a Beatle? And he said,
A baggy swigger.
I beg your pardon?
A baggy swigger.
What is that?
Oh, you know, well, you see, in every city they have 25 baggage speakers, and their job is to go out to the airport each morning and then baggage sweeping all along the line, man.
And Betty and I knew right away, what does that mean? That's got to be good. What does that mean? And so I go to the library and I research swigging and I research baggage, and I find out baggage is a 17th century term in England for a prostitute, and swigging, well, I can imagine swigging a little bit, and and I still don't have any absolute proof that baggy swigging means what I think it means, but you don't crack up. The guys, they're doing that kind of thing. It was so perfect. And George then had the last word, and they're all, thank you very much. Our pleasure. Thank you very much. They're just great guys. They're absolutely great guys. So Betty and I and other girlfriends at high school were totally into the Beatles. I mean, we would do the lunchtime thing. We would share magazines. We'd wait for Billy Crawford to bring in her haul from England, courtesy of her brother. I started to collect magazines. Forgive me, Allison. I only saved one.
That was my next question.
Well, I had stacks and stacks. 16, I think, was my favorite. But there were other, most of them, Lucky Stars. I mean, magazines from England. You could go down to DC to newsstands to get them, but also the local newsstands in Maryland. I just collected them. But the one that I have was a glossy thing. And interestingly enough, Maureen Cleave, the famous Beatles journalist, is part of it too. And it has photographs of their recording in the studio, but I think it's recording the second album. I don't know. And it's well done. It wasn't a rag, if you will, the way that, 16 was. But I would cut out things. I had probably about 3 stacks this high of magazines that I kept for the Beatles. And I still have some ones from the 70s and some ones that my daughter would give me from time to time, because, as I mentioned in the book, my coming back to the Beatles in a serious way started with her giving me Beatles gifts. And I'll always be grateful for that, because she must have known something that I didn't know. I also found out from a neighbor when I was teaching at the university. Evidently, I talked about the Beatles in my classes all the time. And that doesn't surprise me to find that out. But I had been in contact with 2 students. They were both creative writing students when I was teaching creative writing. And I hadn't heard from them for decades. And I got in touch with them. And they told me that I would talk about the Beatles as sort of find out what you love. Okay, find out what you love. And then I love John Lennon, but find out what you love. And then I also had another student in another class that, as a child, her family lived across the street from me. Okay, and then she grew up and she appeared in my class one day. And then I saw her for some reason after my book got published. And she told me, she says, "Do you remember when you had that big poster photo of John Lennon on your front door?" And I said, "You mean on my office door at school?" And she goes, "No, I mean on your front door of your house." And I don't remember that, but I wonder, because I had that big Avondon great photo of John's face. I wonder if I put it up after he got killed.
Oh.
I can't remember, but she says, "Yeah, you had a photo of John Lennon on your door." I thought, well, I was signaling, and I've lived in this house all my life, so the neighborhood now knows, or then knows, that, well, the woman on the top of the hill's got a John Lennon thing going on. But I threw away my magazines. I had to make room for books, including all the books that John Lennon wrote, all the books that I could get my hands on about the Beatles, which when you read them, these little paperback books that came out like in 1964 and 65, and they're so full of nonsense and they're so full of erroneous facts, and they don't even spell the names right, but the paperback industry just knew they would have a readership for those kinds of books. I've kept them, but the magazines went. So forgive me for that.
And I will say that I have a massive collection myself over the years for the research, because I cannot walk into a library and find a great collection of these, because they have been thrown away. But I do seem to get more of them from the North and the South. And of course, for weather reasons and storage purposes. But I do get more from the North. They kept better.
I do.
Mm-hmm. I actually, unless Robert, you wanted to ask a follow-up on that, I wanted to ask a question on her chapter 2.
Why don't you go ahead? Because I know what I want to talk about, but go ahead. You got something teed up.
Okay. Sibbie, in your book, in chapter 2, Boys, you clearly were and are frustrated with people I like to write about for the same frustrations, even now, with rock critics like Lester Bangs and Dave Marsh and Robert Christgau. And I was wondering if you could comment a little bit more on why they were a focus here.
Well, because they were the ones that you read. Until I started doing research, I didn't know any female rock critics. When you read these guys, I would get angry at times, okay? And I know that in your review, you bristled a little bit about my comments about Bangs. And I knew that I was going to push some buttons in that regard with Bangs because he is revered and he should be, okay? He is a very interesting writer. And I was selective in using that quote that I could attack in a way because he called them 4 yobs, but no, 3 yobs and a librarian, Paul being a librarian. And I thought to myself, and I think rightly so, that, well, without those 4 yobs, there wouldn't be any rock criticism, you know? And so, Lester, get this thing. And I guess I did a little bit of ad hominem against him, too, because I knew that he was a drug addict. And I had lived with a drug addict. It took me a while to understand that he was a drug addict, and he died because of drugs. And I'm bothered by how sometimes we seem to praise people who have those addictions, and I think that that isn't the right way to do it. And Bangs died before he should have, because of his drug intake, probably, and that's a loss. So I think that with the Lester Bangs, I was quite selective to my own argument. There's other things when he writes about himself personally. He's quite alluring, and you learn a lot about that. And he deserves his reputation. I started to read Revolution in the Head, which I think is probably the book that meant the most to me in a critical way. Ian MacDonald's book. And I didn't feel ego so much from MacDonald. I felt a very strident intellect and a very driven man to get it right about who did what in the songs and what they meant. And I wasn't bothered by his animus against George Harrison, which other people have pointed out. I liked him the most because I learned the most from him. With Robert Christgau, I feel his ego gets in the way sometimes. I've read his memoir about, what's it called, going into this, I forget what it is. Going. Yeah. And I thought to myself, well, if he can talk about the personal things that he does, if he can talk about his genitals, then I can talk about things too. And I think what I'm doing is reading all of these guys also against sort of the anger that I had against the critics that tore Hemingway apart. And I wrote my dissertation on Hemingway, hoping to revive his reputation and to give another point of view so that the feminists would not attack him and the macho readers, the males that needed him to be a primo macho man, would shut up. So I was sort of angry in a way, or felt that I had an opportunity now to move in, cut a wedge into this dominant male criticism of the Beatles and have to sort of shoot it down a little bit, shear it off, because by the time you've got somebody saying the girls are screaming in preparation for sex and childbirth, you've had it up to here. You have absolutely had. How dare they? I have given birth. Go away from me, And you've got to take a stand and say, you're just simply wrong. You can't let this be anymore. And it diminishes girls and women. And that's wrong, because we've been diminished way too long by too many forces. So I took on the boys.
I think you did rightfully so. My criticism was not that you... Yes, I think that comment...
I liked it, by the way.
Oh, no, I know you did. I myself, in my work, I tear them down equally in a way of talking about, in the same way you do, where they have defined what it means for us as females where they're not us, they're not you, and their experience might be different, but it doesn't mean it's any more valid. And I completely agree with you. And my last piece on Wings, I review, and I heavily criticize Bangs for the same thing, for how they talked about Wings. And in my upcoming work on teen fan magazines, I mean, they've been completely marginalized and have disappeared from any of the rock narrative because these critics have written how it was, and I have air quotes and people can't see me here, how it was, how it should be, this is what happened, rather than considering and dismissing it like, oh, that's fluff, that's not important. But dismissing, going back to that community conversation earlier, the community behind the teen fan magazines and the experience of women. And this leads us into the conversation about screaming that I wanted to go into. And your title, My Private Lennon, is it Explorations of a Fan Who Never Screamed. You state it right away in your title, which I find fascinating. And you talk on page 27, you say that Betty and I never screamed. We preferred to ooze. And I absolutely love the opening of your book where you say, the man who fixed my washing machine was writing out the bill when he saw the postcard photograph of John and Yoko on my bookshelf. And I have a two-part question coming up. The usual Beatles conversation ensued, and then because I couldn't help it, I blurted, I was there, which I love that you're so proud to be there. I would be proud too if I was there. But you end it with this. You guys are conversing. You say that you saw Ed Sullivan in 65, and he said, wow, you did. His eyes were widening, leaning toward asking me more questions. And the first thing is, no, I didn't scream. And later on, you refer to, where is it? Right here. I hated the screamers. By then, the Beatles had produced a cascading effect on me, one that superseded sex. Hard to believe, I know, but art will do that to you on page 29. And the final comment, well, I'll add that one at the end. I know Robert's going to want to talk about this as well. What drove you to put it as your subtitle, as an exploration of a fan who'd never screamed? And can you comment on what the screaming meant to you, what it didn't mean to you?
Yeah, well, regarding the title, once I realized, as my editor said, captured by a voice isn't going to capture readers because they'll want to know, what does that mean? Whose voice? You have to kind of tell them what the book's going to be about. Frankly, what I wanted to do with that Explorations from a Fan Who Never Screamed was to indicate, to signal to the readers that this is going to be a serious book, knowing that how the perception of the screamers is diminished, is made to be cartoon, is dismissed. Are those weeping, pissing adolescent girls? Who needs to hear another something from any of them? And so I wanted to have the fact right out there that I was not a screamer and that maybe I've got something different to talk about. So that is the rationale for the title of the book, to let them know right away that this isn't going to be a gushy book. All the adverbs, all the ways that the screamers are described, and I can describe them that way as well, though I think I understand them better than people that are just describing them. I don't want this to be thought of as anything other than a totally serious and hopefully new way of thinking and feeling about the Beatles. So I opposed sort of what I was doing with the screaming.
You're making that distinction from the onset so that people like me who go, oh, My Private Lennon, it's fanish stuff. Who needs that? Who needs all this gushing crap? Which there's plenty of. So, yes, that puts the reader on notice who stumbles upon your book. This is not that. It's not what you think it is. And so you achieve that goal.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Would you say, because I know that you have reviewed the conversation I had with Debbie Gindler and Carol Tyler, and we talk about screaming, and they refer to it as love. And I don't feel like you completely dismiss it. I feel like it's exactly what you say, is the connotation that has been attached to it has taken away from the actual meaning, and associating yourself with it could seem to be to do more harm than good.
I think you're right. I think also, I was really struck, first of all, I was really struck by how Debbie and Carol described their experiences, and the absolute sort of purified takeaway from that description is there is no explanation for it. It's an overpowering emotion. It's something that just takes you over, and Debbie calls it love. It is love. There's many other things too, but it's there, and nobody planned to go and scream. But I was thinking about this, okay, and maybe this is too snarky of me, or maybe this is something the way that can explain some of the screaming. American audiences were prepped for the Beatles to come. They had learned the term Beatlemania. They had seen the Screaming Girls in England. There was a lot of buzz about that. It's coming, it's coming, it's coming. So I think that something is interesting when you see something, say a group of English teenagers screaming and fainting, the famous image of the Bobby carrying the girls away. Does that give license? Does that create an opportunity? And I'm not suggesting that the girls that screamed knew this on any level or said, well, we're going to do that too. Let's get together and scream. Just like, I don't think that that's what happens. But I do feel that seeing an experience can affect you when you then go into that same experience. Okay. And I also feel that the screaming is something that has the ripple effect of being in the community of other screamers. And so you yourself screaming, you become part of this larger wave of screaming. Because if you wanted to just solo scream, which probably many people did in their bedroom, I had reactions, when, or with just me and Betty. I think it's just, I really wonder, I had never thought of this before. This did not come to me when I was writing the book, but there were all those pre-Sullivan images of Beatlemania in England. And I just wonder whether that gave American girls license to do it, because if they did it, well-behaved English lasses, then we can do this too. And when you get that high energy together.
When the Beatles come back, I'm going to be hysterical, especially when Paul sings. You come back here as soon as they walk out, and when they start playing, I'll be here and I'll be screaming.
How about you?
Oh, I'll be worse than her, believe me. No one can get worse than I do.
Anybody else going to be hysterical?
Hey! I'm going to be hysterical when John sings.
If these balconies weren't here, I'd jump down. Yeah, we'd run right out to the field.
Another thing that I've been thinking about screaming is that, because it's football season, and nobody puts down the guys come dressed as whatever the mascot. Before the Redskins got renamed the Commodores, of course, somebody could come with a big plumed hat, like an Admiral Commodore or something, or the Atlantic Braves for the baseball painting their chests. Nobody talks about these guys getting up and screaming and everything like that. Nobody says, oh, they're just being so unmasculine. But you've got criticism of girls screaming. Here's the other thing in terms of screaming. I was there, and the Ed Sullivan studio was not a cataclysm of screaming. The debut of A Hard Day's Night in R.K. O'Keefe's theater in D.C. was. Betty and I, her father dropped us off at 6:30 in the morning. We stood in line. There was already a line. I think the show opened at 9. We stayed there all day because he was going to bring us home after he worked. The theater is an old-timey theater, probably held 1,000 people. And during the playing of A Hard Day's Night, the film, tons and tons and tons of screaming. And other girls screaming to the screamers to say, be quiet, stop screaming because it's a bloomin' book. You want to hear what they say. The first run through could hardly hear what they said. Second run through, cleared out. Other people came in, but other people stayed, like Betty and I stayed. We saw the movie probably 3 times, okay, in a row. But other people were screaming, telling the screamers to be quiet so you could hear the movie. And then everybody for, a month or so was making all these, give us a kiss, or you're a very clean old man, or, the blooming book and stuff like that. Because it's a fabulous, fabulous movie. And you got the Beatles more than life size. That film is just fabulous. But you want to hear that film. And that's what I feel like. I want to hear the music, So that's sort of my take on the Screamers. But I'm not making it up when I say that during A Hard Day's Night, there was, don't scream, let's listen. Some people stood up, hush, hush, we want to hear the film, which is interesting, I think. You'd never do that at the Beatles concert, though, because that was a place where the girls could go and scream.
Could scream.
And maybe that is the difference between 13 and 15. Who knows what I would have done if I was 13? I peed my pants a lot when I laughed when I was 13. I mean, that was not uncommon. Oh, yeah, I lived to tell that, But maybe that is the difference between 13 and 15.
I did think, and I did say this in the review, is that I don't think you're wrong at all. That should never be the first question, because it's typically a question asked of females.
Yes.
Why are you asking it? Who's asking it? And I think that it shouldn't be, if at all. It doesn't make a first generation Beatles fan. And if that is the emotional reaction, that's their emotional reaction for them to decide to share with you. And I think I felt like it was almost like when asking a woman, why don't you have a baby?
Oh, I agree.
That's what I thought.
I think what it does is when you're asked that, and you're asked it by a man. Never have I been asked this by a woman. Never. And I bet I would still be asked by a man if a man said, oh, you wrote this book, did you scream? It wouldn't surprise me. I think what it does is it's misogynist to begin with. And secondly, I think what it does is that became, until things got rectified, until the Beatles, I think, really proved their cultural worth, that they weren't fly in the pan, that they weren't just waiting for the next act, that they survived, that they created a culture, they changed the culture across the board. And then suddenly all these people just thought, oh, just another band and screaming girls. They distill an incredible, important moment in cultural history down to this one thing where they can point the finger at a silly teenage girl and then ask of that grown-up, supposedly silly teenage girl, did you scream? You screamed, did you? Did you scream? So it's really kind of a nasty, snarky thing. And it shows an ignorance. It just shows an ignorance.
I think you say it beautifully in the book, in that chapter with, so instead of asking a woman if she ever screamed for the Beatles, ask instead what she did with the love she had for them.
There you go.
I think you summed that up beautifully. So thank you for that. I think that's absolutely gorgeous.
How do you describe the feeling you get when they sing?
You die.
It just drives you crazy and you don't know what to do. You just get all excited all over. I noticed that there aren't any boys waiting on line here. How do you account for that?
They're crazy. They're jealous, too, I bet. They're jealous, that's all. Because not many girls... It's a shame to show not many girls treat other boys like this, because they're not really... They don't have anything. I mean, these Beatles have looks, they have talent, they just have brains. I mean, they're really smart for getting in this business, like, as soon as they did, and all that.
I actually wanted to ask another question. On page 49, this leads in from the screaming conversation. You say this, and I feel this is so brilliant in the climate today, because we have a lot of conversations, a lot of female academics, specifically Christine Feldman Barrett with the Women's History of the Beatles. And I know you're very familiar with her. She's lovely. And in my work too, I deal with this because I write about Teen Fan Magazine and rock criticism. And that's actually what got me into it, because my glass was shattered by Teen Set. And that's a whole other conversation. But this resonated with me as a young female, not as young as some, but in this world of rock that's just full of men. Even in the Beatles world, you say this, you say, at what point does factual knowledge interfere with my listening pleasure? Am I adjusting my responses to the songs in order to prove to my audience that I'm knowledgeable about Beatles recordings? Will my gathering of factual knowledge eclipse that fanatical teenage girl? I don't know if I have a question or on the sense of, I feel that way often, that I've told Robert this several times, that I don't like to do trivial stuff because I feel like I get lampooned if I don't know that exact little fact, when I have this great feeling instead.
It's weaponized against you, possessing knowledge.
Especially as a female.
Oh, totally. The same way that screaming was for the earlier generation of fans. It's like a setup to make the person you're asking if they screamed feel bad, because they're lightweight and unserious.
Now, I know you asked the question, but do you have any answer for that? Do you have a feeling that can go behind that statement or elaborate to it?
I think that what was happening, what was happening in the book, especially getting some of the research and wanting it to be more than just trivial stuff, even if it was trivial on a personal level, because I wanted to link, and I could sincerely link my experience with the Beatles and Lennon to very important issues in my life, and I think issues in the culture. But as I started to do serious research in the Beatles, I realized that I didn't really know all the things that I should have known about the Beatles. I'll never forget when I realized, courtesy, I must have been of Revolution in the Head, or maybe it was some other place, but it was years after I should have known that Paul played the guitar on Taxman, and it wasn't George Harrison. And that just was like, what, and made me rethink everything. I think what happens to me is that teenage girl didn't stay a teenage girl. But what happened to that teenage girl created all the things that came after her, and that two changes happened simultaneously because of the Beatles. My love for the Beatles and the sheddings that came off of my love for Lennon. For instance, I love English men. I mean, I sought English men out. I noticed the hands. I never noticed. I have no idea what Marlon Brando's hands look like, but I noticed John Lennon's hands, so he's imprinting in me for things that I'm looking for, the importance of a voice. And that's really true to me. Could you live with a partner whose voice aggravated you? I couldn't. I mean, it would be like living I just couldn't. So that happened. That teenage girl awakening to those small but very important things that the Beatles, that got that self-knowledge from the Beatles. I got the self-knowledge of, I love research. I want to find out what baggy swigger means. That teenage girl went to the library. That teenage girl razored out a picture of a man in an Irish pub, because I brought that back and put it on my wall. I became a criminal because of that. At the same time, though, that I realized even more I wanted to study literature and be a writer, and even more that I think I could become that. And that art, the creative impulse in me, was just not la-di-da, but it was here, and I need to honor it. And that's a gift that the Beatles gave that teenage girl. And it opened things up for me. Granted, the Beatles were not, and Lennon had lost some importance to me. Life happens, especially when you have a child. Obviously, I had to finish my degree. Love, hate, all life happens. But in thinking back about this, it started with the Beatles. And it interestingly coincided with me understanding I wanted to be a poet. That is such a great thing. And doing that at 15, 16, and never forgetting the program that I gave myself to follow. So I forget what the question was. Did I answer the question?
You said absolutely something beautiful. Thank you. It brings tears to my eyes.
I was piggybacking on what Robert said about that. We have to always go back to that teenage girl or that teenage boy. I'll give you an example, a very serious example. So I live with a man, and he's a musician. He's a professional musician. He's retired now. He's 80, but he became a professional musician when he was 17, a jazz saxophonist, and he also plays flute and clarinet. So he's a young man. He's about 17 or 18, and John Coltrane is playing. He lived in Chicago, and John Coltrane was playing in DC, and he was involved with an older woman at the time. And anyhow, they drove to DC and heard John Coltrane. Once they got in the club, Robbie, my guy, didn't say a word to this woman. He was there to hear Coltrane. And it didn't change his life in the sense, I'm now going to be a saxophone player, because he was already a saxophone player. But Coltrane, there you go. You go and hear Coltrane live. Okay. He couldn't talk after the show, and hardly did he talk at all on the drive back. I mean, this was a long drive. Anyhow, the woman broke up with him because she didn't understand. What's going on with you? This was a date. Come on, it's just a concert. It's just a gig. It's just a concert. No, it's a life-changing moment. It's a sacred thing. You are experiencing perfection, and you be quiet while that happens. I'm not saying that just because girls screamed at the Beatles. Okay, I mean, people talked all through jazz concerts and stuff, but for Robbie, it was a moment of nothing. He didn't want anything else to come. Oh, I mean, this is why you fall in love with people, because, okay, you understand it. I mean, and I understand that. And you can have those kinds of moments throughout your life, but when they happen, especially when you're a teenager, when your consciousness is starting to format and feel things and understand things in a way, I think it's central. And to ignore those moments is a real mistake, because then that's when the culture comes in and says, well, no, you have to be a bookkeeper. No, you have to learn to type. And no, you don't want to do this. And, oh, it's just a hobby and stuff like that. No, it's a very, very important thing. And that's what those teenage girls are telling us, I think.
I'm glad you brought that anecdote up, because you sent that to me in an email when we were talking about the video I'd sent you. So I was going to ask, and I'm glad you brought that up. Thank you. It seems like the Beatles are the endless gateway drug to so many things that enrich our lives, as you described and we've talked about elsewhere in the show. Allison, you had a couple points you wanted to run with?
I just want to make a point here, or just a comment on this one. To sum up what you were just talking about, I really do like on page 33 in the In My Life chapter, you say, being a fan is like floating down a long river. Some banks have lush vegetation, some are strewn with beer bottles, some are for sunbathing. Around the next one, there's a lovely sunset. The point is to know the river, to dip your foot in as many times as it takes to feel it as it moves along, which it will do with or without you. I've made a bargain with myself, granted, not too hard a one. In order to keep John's voice, I had to keep the man all in all. Can you comment on, I know your whole book does this, but for the listeners who are interested, can you comment a little bit before I ask a question about Yoko, how you kept John with you throughout your life and still do?
Well, in keeping him, in regards to that section that you just quoted, is what do you do with the fact of John Lennon's mistakes, personality quirks, awfulness? What do you do with that? We live in a cancel culture. So this is a ripe question, I think, that you asked. This is a very pertinent question, I think. He treated Cynthia terribly at the end. He was not a good father to Julian, and Julian paid the price for that. He put a man in hospital on Paul's 21st birthday party. He attacked, I forget the man's name, but a Liverpudlian disc jockey.
Bob Wooler?
Yeah, because I had asked John whether he and Brian were, a little closer than they should be. And John was drunk. And if Paul hadn't pulled him off, or Cynthia pulled him off, John then later went and apologized. Some people think he kicked Stuart Sutcliffe, but that's ridiculous. It's ridiculous also that some people think he kicked Yoko when she was pregnant. That's ridiculous. He did bad things. He used drugs. He lied. So what do you do with that? And it was hard. When you read Cynthia's 2 books, but I think especially her second book, John, she says at the beginning, I think, or maybe it's at the end, I forget, but she says, if I'd known all this about John Lennon, I wouldn't have married him. I would have run away as fast as I can. And I thought, wow, that's a strong statement, because she didn't run away. She fell in love with him, had a child with him, and then suffered under him, and then wrote a book. I appreciate her honesty, but what do you do with that? And it's a moment for you individually to decide, what's my cutting off point? I don't have a cutting off point for John. I forgive him. I do. I forgive him. I have to forgive him. I forgive I dismiss a lot of artists that have difficulties. I adore Ezra Pound. I don't care if he was sending out those radio messages in Italy. I don't care. His poetry is fabulous. There would not be modern poetry were it not for Ezra Pound. John's a little closer to me, and I forgive him for that. I forgive him for mistreating Julian, and I admire him for being a good father to Sean. And the double tragedy is that he was learning how to be a better father with Julian, too, before he got killed. I think it's a question that fans, I suppose, need to answer themselves. I mean, when do you find out, for instance, I don't know rap music, but there was a rapper recently that is in jail because he raped people or had underage. But what do you do with Chuck Berry? I mean, we could start with Chuck Berry, okay? What do you do? Do you then not listen? What do you do? This is a question that fandom is, I think, perhaps an interesting frame through which to ask this question, because fandom is so emotional. And yet, what do you do then when unpleasant truth invades that emotional feeling? What do you do when a person is capable of making you feel so good, but yet you find out that there's something awful about that person? I don't have an answer for that. I think it might have something to do with respect. Does the person, once the faults are revealed, do they claim the faults? Do they deny the faults? Do they ignore the faults? Do they try to get better? And then can you respect a person for that? Does art outweigh the concerns? This is a question that is really ripe today because we're banning books. We're finding out more and more how awful people are across the spectrum. That shouldn't surprise us, but it continually does. So what do we do with it? In my case, there it is. They're human. John Lennon is human. He is a man, as Shakespeare says, all in all. And I have taken him all in all. I think what's good about Lennon is that he did speak to his personal difficulties. He did. Others aren't, but he did, and I respect him for that. How do you feel? Because this is right in the middle of fandom, isn't it? What do you do when you find out?
Oh, I can't speak for Robert, but oh man, it is difficult. I think it's difficult for all of us. I wouldn't say I ignore the shortcomings or infallibilities that come across when I hear them about people that I adore. I do struggle with John, though, and I opened with that. And so when I remember when Christine asked me to review the book, I thought, why can't it be about Paul or Ringo? And it's nothing against John, because as my partner, he points out constantly, he says, some of your favorite songs are John songs. You love John's vocals. Like when I hear All I Gotta Do, it transports me. But it's the other side that I deal with, just like you with John. I find him complicated. I do find some modern fans of John Lennon absolutely worship him and excuse him rather than, as you say, forgive and grapple with and consider. I don't think it's an easy answer. When you're a fan, you're a fan, especially with something like the Beatles. Now, Gary Glitter, on the other hand, I don't know how many people are sad or, maybe at sports games, which you still hear his music played, because it's bigger than him with that song. It represents, the beginning of I don't know, football game or whatnot.
Fill me in. Gary Glitter.
What's his famous song? Yeah.
Rock and Roll Part 2. Dun, 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 hey. Dun,
Yeah.
dun, dun,
Yeah.
dun.
Well, he did something very horrible. And so, I won't put the song on, but if it comes on at a stadium, everyone's still, but I don't think they know at the same time. With R. Kelly, we know.
A better known example might be Michael Jackson, to the extent
he's
that
complicated.
people buy into what he's been accused of.
There you go.
Yeah, it's hard. I don't think there's an easy answer.
I think human beings instinctively look for solid boundaries, rules that are adherable at all times to things so you can sort of run your life better. It's like, okay, this is a fixed law that I must adhere to. Something as squishy as this, a personal artist that we revere for their art that has done horrible things. Well, it's easy. If I don't like that person's music, cancel. To hell with them. If I love their music, I love their art, whatever it is they create, I can forgive them anything.
You can find a way.
Now, on this show, I've been accused frequently of being anti-John or tearing him down. It's not that. In the case of John Lennon, it's so much mythology has been built around him in overdrive after December 1980 to put him on this pedestal about who he wasn't. It's like, no, this is the guy that said, give me some truth. Give us the truth that we know to be true and not this bullshit PR spin running out of the Dakota. I find the real guy a hell of a lot more interesting. Then if you want to cancel him knowing what you know about him, that's up to you. But don't make him into something he wasn't.
Exactly. I can give you an example where there was a cutoff point for me. This is some years ago. I was reading Keith Richards' autobiography, Life, okay? And I'm not a big Rolling Stones fan, okay? I'm not a Rolling Stones fan. I liked them at the beginning because I liked every British band that I could get my hands on. But those days are over. So the Stones were doing their thing early on, and Keith Richards, Anna Pallenberg had the baby, and they're both juiced up and everything. And the baby dies. Now, the baby could have died from the sudden death.
SIDS, yeah.
The SIDS. It could have died because Keith was on tour and Anna was drugged. Who knows? The baby died. A baby died, though. A baby died. And Keith, and I'm paraphrasing because I don't have the book in front of me, talks about this incident. And the band was touring. And he said, we kept on touring. He said, because what are you going to do? The baby died. And I thought to myself, if a child of the Beatles had died while they were on tour, they would stop the tour, go back, bury the child, and then continue with the tour. Now, I don't know whether I'm right or wrong, or whether that's even apples and oranges. But the fact that Keith, I don't know, it just struck me like it's your child has died. Doesn't life stop for a while when a child dies? You're famous. No one's going to say, oh, you can't do this. You can do whatever you want to do.
Well, that very thing happened with Led Zeppelin when Robert Plant's 5-year-old son died while they were in tour in America. They canceled the tour, went back home, grieved, and I think it did destabilize them because, per Robert's telling, John Bonham was there to help him grieve, and the other two sort of checked out.
Oh.
And he never felt the same about being in that band again. But it's interesting you point to that example about Keith Richards, because I don't think that was a hard break-off point for you, if you didn't like the Stones anyway, to dismiss Keith.
Yeah, that could be. Yeah, you're right about that. Yeah, you're right. And I don't know if I had liked it. I just don't know.
But it does circle back to our lack of objectivity when we're talking about people who we revere as artists. Is like, there is no line depending on how much we love their art, I think, for most people, unless it's Allison's example of Gary Glitter. I think that's probably pretty universal. If you're talking pedophilia, then no one's going to turn a blind eye to
this
that.
This actually kind of leads me into my next segment when we talk about how we feel about certain people, especially in the Beatles realm. Now, Sibbie, you are critical of Yoko's use of John Lennon's personal items in your book. You say that it panders to those fans who see Lennon not as a man, but as a religious deity. My comment is, I want you to expand on that, because there's part of me that does agree with you, but then part of me that thinks, well, what about for the fans who weren't either alive, who love Lennon, or who couldn't see certain items in museum exhibits or artifacts, whether it be the bloody glasses, which I have seen in Liverpool when they had their latest John and Yoko display at the Life Museum, or John's bedroom, or guitars or clothing or whatever. And for them, is seeing that not equal in a way to a photograph that you were lucky enough to take that people do not have. Could you elaborate on that for us?
Yeah, but I think it might be helpful. The audience would probably want to hear what you said. So why don't you read the quote that you said in the review?
I said, at times, O'Sullivan appears protective of her John, illustrated by her criticisms of Yoko's display of John's bloody glasses, the glasses he was wearing when he was murdered, as well as charging admission to see Lennon artifacts, something she would not have done with her John's material possessions. She argues that the use of certain artifacts panders to those fans who see Lennon not as a man, but as a religious deity. And then I add, is it not for a fan who maybe didn't have that chance to see Lennon live or able to take a photo? Could you comment more on that?
Sure. I think what this is it tells you something about me and maybe my sort of reluctance to not necessarily go to museums. But I think that the Beatle industry is so huge, and I just worry about it. This is a difficult one for me. So let me think a little bit here. I know that when I read an article about what was happening in Liverpool with the bus and tours and everything like that, I generally don't like that kind of stuff. So this is a personal predilection for me.
You're allowed.
Yeah, this is your book.
No, but I mean in general. I mean, I love to go to art galleries and stuff like that. I think also what happens is that I've not been to many places, okay? My life has been very limited in many regards. So, and I'm not a group person. So, whereas my daughter can go up to New York and take the Sex and the City bus tour and love it and talk to all the girls on the bus and stuff like that, that's something that I would never do. And when I even went to Liverpool, though I realized belatedly that I should have gone to Liverpool at first before I went to St. Ives and stuff like that. I didn't know what I was doing when I was over there in England. That my Liverpool experience was not the quintessential Beatles Liverpool experience, but I did have Liverpool experiences and I prized them. So I'm thinking that it's no longer personal when the items are out there and they're on display. And I really had a problem with the bloody glasses for two reasons. It's like, if they are actually his bloody glasses, if that is actually his blood, and I think it's a legitimate question to ask if it actually is, or did she have them made? Because it's understandable that she would have them made. We do have to remember that blood does change biologically. I've seen blood be someplace and then you go back after a while and it's not blood anymore,
Yeah, it degrades.
But I just felt, it degrades and sometimes it just goes away. You don't know it. That's why you have to have all those little CSI lights to find out where it actually is sometimes. I felt that was invasive of her to do that, and that she was knowing that would be a real ping moment for the fans that came to see it. Oh my God, that's John Lennon's blood. Oh my God, why did he die? And all those reactions make a lot of sense. But it is very much a relic in the Christian sense of the term. It's very much set there to get an emotional reaction from the fans. And it's one that, and I have no way of knowing for sure, but it's one that I'm not so sure John would have appreciated or even liked. I'm wondering whether it would have been too far, too far to go. So I had a sort of an aversion to that. But I don't like these big displays in general. Write it off to me, being somebody that shies away from the group experience, shies away from things you have to necessarily pay for that you can maybe enjoy in some other way. It is an industry, these museums and stuff. I think Yoko has a right to do it, but, we don't know where John's ashes are. There's a reason for that, and she wisely has not divulged that place. So in a way, there's kinds of some contradictory forces here. She won't tell us where the ashes are. She did Strawberry Fields, and I understand that. I like that. It's not dolled up. Strawberry Fields is not dolled up. You can go there and be private with your thoughts in Strawberry Fields. When you're going through the big museum and you're going to see the bloody glasses, I don't know. A lot of people will say it's a moving experience, and I understand that. And it can bring John back to those people. And people could say, well, there's glasses in the Holocaust Museum, and that has a big impact, the big pile of glasses. And it's a visceral response, no question about it. This is one man, though. This is not a Holocaust. This is not 500 years of slavery. This is one man. So maybe the scale is a little bit different. But I know that when I read about the glasses, I had those questions. And I didn't like it. But I think my response to that is just who I am.
I can't disagree with anything you said.
No, yeah.
It's not something that they can hold against either party.
Right.
But Allison's point is absolutely foundational. It probably means a great deal, especially to those people who don't have a real one-of-a-kind photograph like I do, or were, closer to the actual event or to the actual man,
When I saw the glasses in Liverpool, when I lived there, I don't know in the past how she has displayed them or how they've been displayed, but this was in reference to gun violence in America. So it was there to represent a larger idea. But I could understand at the same time not wanting to see them because it just makes it so much more real.
Or turning it into a religious relic, like Sibbie points out.
Yeah, like Sibbie said.
The first time I saw them was probably the same way most people saw them, which was on the cover of Season of Glass when that came out, like 6 months or something after he was killed. And I remember initially being stunned and shocked. But then being a student of history, what it reminded me of and the way that I could see Yoko justifying it at the time was for the exact same reason Jackie Kennedy wouldn't clean up after the shooting of her husband.
Yep.
I want them to see what they've done.
Mm.
I want this to be made real. This isn't just something you read about some news story. This happened to me. This happened to him. And you're going to experience what I experienced.
I wish I had thought about that famous photograph. Of course, now Jackie Kennedy, she didn't wash up, but she also didn't ask the photograph.
That's true. But she wouldn't change
out
out of her clothes when people were begging her to.
But she wouldn't change out of her clothes. That's a powerful example. It eluded me.
Mm.
It could be all things. It could be many things.
I'm sure that everyone listening is thinking about that question right now or that thought.
Mm-hmm.
So at the beginning of the book, you talk about how your photograph you took is yours and it's private, but not to ruin the ending of the book, you share the photograph. What made you decide to do that?
Thank God.
Yeah. I didn't think I was going to see it.
I could. Well, did I ever say I'd never show it? Or I don't display it or something. I don't have it on display because it would erode,
Mm-hmm.
I wanted people to see it, and I made sure that I retained the copyright of it so that people can't use it and stuff like that. So I think that ego, I guess, Allison.
Bragging rights.
Ego, it's proof. I mean, I'm being honest here, ego, perhaps. Or also, it's sort of like, you know what? I was there and I got the fucking proof. August 65, August 65, when they used to tag the dates of the old prints of photography.
Yeah, Instamatics.
And obviously compared to Debbie's experience,
Yeah. Hers is otherworldly. Hers is
she must have connections. She
does.
Yeah. Well, and it's like there were other photographs that I could have put in the book, but she didn't want any. They couldn't use anymore. But I said, I don't want to publish the book without that photograph. And she said, we can't use it on the cover because if you blew it up, it's such a bad, the points are too far apart, So we have that one photograph.
Oh.
It's perfect.
It is.
And it ends the book after the poem about his death.
I think it ends it beautifully. I was so happy. And I was aware it was going to be at the end. I had been told and I refused to look. I was like, no, I need to wait. I don't know why, but I felt that way. I felt I needed to wait. I needed to read it. And if it's at the end, it's meant to be at the end, and I need to wait.
There's something to be said for delayed gratification.
Well, does it work, though? Because it's so tiny, but it's John.
It's John, and I know you were there, and it just ties it beautifully. And actually, there are a couple of comments I kind of wanted to end with talking about your book because, again, I really loved your book. And you say a couple of things, and I love this. You say the Beatles I'd write about for this book would be mine. And you pose a question later in the book, who would want to read about me? And then finally, you talk about that you must accept that such people exist probably in large numbers, people who don't know about the Beatles or about John or have any idea this grand connection to it. How does it make you feel knowing that there are people out there who don't know about the Beatles? And how does it make you feel knowing that your book is going to help them learn more about the Beatles?
Well, a book can only help them learn about the Beatles if they read the book. Mm-hmm. The book came out about a week before COVID became a problem. So everything sort of stopped. And if it weren't for people like you, Allison, or online readers like Robert and stuff, my book would just have disappeared because none of the, even the Washington Post, for which I review, didn't do a review of the book. So I never got a real,
launch.
I got positive reviews, the ones that I got, and I am incredibly grateful. And it was very interesting to read them and to realize, wow, this is how it feels, this is how it works, and stuff like that. So for somebody to understand the Beatles and understand me, they'd have to read the book. But I was taken back by that postal worker who had to think a little bit about who John Lennon was. And that made me realize that as well known as they are, as culturally important as they are, as eternal as they will be, time always marches on. And as I say in the book, one day our culture works so fast and things don't ever stay the same that there will be generations for whom I don't think the Beatles matter. They're like Shakespeare. They'll always be there. But how many people willingly want to, how do you basically go to Shakespeare? You have an academic urge or you read something. I really worry if the Beatles, once they die, we got 3 left, if you think of Yoko. And Yoko is 90, and the others are in their 80s. They will die. They will die in your lifetime, and probably in my lifetime too, I hope. And I really wonder what will happen then. There will be a flare of, the Beatles, and hopefully that will reignite something. But after that, what? They'll always be there. But what? It sounds mean, doesn't it? It sounds cruel. You don't want it to happen because they've been so important to you. But they will recede. I'm pretty sure about that. So I think that the more people that read books, whether it be mine or any book by somebody that writes about how something like singers can change your life or something that changes your life, whatever they read, that's the most important thing that they can say, my life can be changed. I better look at my life now to see how I live my life. Am I happy? Am I joyful? What gives me pleasure? What do I want to fix? What helps me grow? And I hope it's not just some horrible AI machine waiting to gobble us all up in the future and everything, because that would be anathema to what the Beatles Project has always been about, which is to make you feel happy while you're alive as a human being. Again, I've forgotten what the question is, and I am pleased, and I hope that people read the book. And I really, really appreciate any effort on your parts to make that happen, especially with this podcast, and read all the books about the Beatles and start to think more seriously about the power that they have. But our culture will change. And I'll tell you, I just don't know. What do you think? I mean, because they'll always be there. They'll be in the textbooks. But what's going to happen? I just don't know. Difficult to predict, but we know what cultural change happens.
I feel hopeful because I see the evidence around me all the time of younger people getting into it. I just came back having spent the weekend in Galena, Illinois, which is kind of a Civil War town, Grant's home and all that stuff. And you go up and down the antique stores and shops, boutiques and things like that. And I found one, it was just another boutique, but it was seemingly a Beatles shop.
Oh.
And here they are. Their survival depends on them being able to move merch. And it's not branded as a Beatles store. It's just one more boutique, yet top to bottom in the windows and a corner in there, all kinds of shirts, all kinds of lunch boxes, and all kinds of stuff that they must be moving to somebody of an age to buy that stuff. And it's not what you would expect them to find in a place like that.
This is a good example of how my privacy works against me, because you're out and about. Allison's out and about. I need to get out and about. I don't mean to be like dismal sounding. Maybe it's just because I'm coming to an end eventually, sooner than that. But the culture just seems different to me, but I'll take your word on it. I'll count on the young.
I'll add to that. I mean, I'm 36, and when I was 25, I went off to get the first Beatles master's degree, and now that one's gone and there's a new one. They just started a Journal of Beatles Studies, Holly Tesler and others at Liverpool University. So there is a growth right now. And what we see is we've had a lot of conferences based on the Beatles, academically, non-academically, and now Australia, they just announced a conference based off of Taylor Swift's work. So it's this beautiful growth in the Beatles field, which I think is very encouraging of others. I was at a Popular Culture Association conference talking about teen fan magazines and the Beatles, of course, and there were 6 Beatle panels, but on the rise was the Grateful Dead panels. I think there were 10 Grateful Dead panels because they haven't had their renaissance of scholarship in the same way I feel the Beatles have. And now the Beatles scholarship is even shifting to consider like your work, Sibbie, and more work that is dedicated and revolves around a female and youth experience, which is wonderful too. And others like Mel Evans or George Martin and Yoko Ono. And
she's on the rise. That's good. Her reputation is on the rise.
It is. It's like like any figure in history. I teach humanities, and so we talk about, and I'm no way comparing. I want to be clear that these two people aren't being compared, but we talk about figures, how their perception changes throughout time. And we look at Julius Caesar and Brutus, of course, and how Brutus can be seen as, a liberator or as a traitor. It depends on who you ask and when you read about him, etc. And I think it's the same in the Beatles world. It's changing. And with that change comes a revival every time. And work like yours, and this is what I say in the reviews, is breaking those chains that a Beatles fan has to be an 80-year-old man or just a man who knows about rock and shops at record stores. It's everything else in between. And you're showing all ages and all voices that their experience matters.
Yes.
And the more work we have like yours, the more work we will have and the better it will be. So that's my 2 cents on that one.
I cannot add anything to that, Allison. You summed it up beautifully. And that's the beauty of this book that I cannot recommend enough to anybody listening to this podcast. You don't have to even buy it if you don't want to. Just check it out at a library, but it's damn well worth it, because any book about a familiar subject can open your eyes and see things differently and think about them differently is worth it. And that is what I would want to impart to my listeners on this show.
Absolutely. If you're a fan of Spock or Diana Ross or anything, your private whomever, Lennon or McCartney or Taylor Swift,
Adele.
Yeah, that's what I love about Amy Winehouse. She's a good one. That's what I really liked about your book, Sibbie. So thank you so much for your time and
for writing it,
sharing your story, for writing it. Yeah.
Thank both of you. This has been a delight.
Something About the Beatles. Created and hosted by Robert Rodriguez. Executive producer Rick Way. Title song by the Corgis.